Chapter 1. The Day Everything Ended. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the ceiling. It wasn't the ceiling I knew. The color was wrong. The small crack near the corner wasn't there. The light came in from a different angle. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I remembered. This was not my home. I lay still on the narrow bed, listening to the quiet around me. No familiar sounds, no routine, just the low hum of a heater and the distant noise of traffic outside a window I hadn't opened yet. The room was small, too small to belong to a life that felt stable. A suitcase stood near the wall. My shoes were placed neatly beside it, like I was afraid they might disappear if I didn't keep them close. I sat up slowly and looked around. A single chair, a small table, a lamp with a soft yellow light. Everything temporary, everything borrowed. This was where I was now. I took a deep breath and felt it catch in my chest. Not panic, not sadness, something flatter, heavier. Shock. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that makes everything quiet. Just a few weeks ago, I woke up in a different place, a place with memories, a place that felt like proof that my life made sense. Now that place was gone. My job was gone too. I didn't need to think about it to remember. The email replayed itself easily in my mind. Short, polite, final. We've decided to move in a different direction. That was all it said. Years of work reduced to one sentence. The relationship ended even more quietly. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, just a tired conversation that didn't go anywhere. Two people realizing they couldn't carry the weight anymore. And the money? It didn't disappear overnight. It slipped away slowly, payment by payment, until there was almost nothing left. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my feet on the cold floor. The room didn't move. The world didn't shake. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part. Nothing around me showed how much I had lost. I stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, people were already moving. Cars passed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. Life was happening as usual. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass and watched. No one knew what had ended for me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even scared yet. I felt empty in a different way than sadness. I felt disconnected from who I used to be. I used to know how to introduce myself. I had answers, a job title, a shared life, a sense of direction. Now, if someone asked me who I was, I wouldn't know where to start. I went to the small bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror reflected my face clearly. I looked the same, maybe a little more tired, but still me. That confused me. How could everything be gone when I was still standing here? I splashed water on my face and held onto the sink for a moment. My hands felt steady. My body worked, but my identity didn't. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes from the suitcase. Each item felt like it belonged to a different version of me, a version with plans, a version with a future that made sense. I sat back down on the bed after getting dressed. There was nothing urgent to do, no place I needed to be, no one waiting for me. That realization landed hard. I wasn't needed anywhere. The thought didn't make me feel useless. It made me feel unreal. I tried to think about what came next, but my mind wouldn't go there. Every future thought stopped before it formed, like my brain refused to imagine anything beyond this moment. So I stayed in it. I thought about how quickly things had changed, how I didn't see it coming even though the signs were there, how confident I felt just a short time ago. Confidence now felt like something I remembered, not something I owned. I remembered how I used to wake up with purpose. Even on hard days, there was structure, a reason to move forward. Now, the structure was gone. I checked my phone out of habit. No messages, no notifications, nothing that required my attention. I put it down again. Silence filled the room. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out slowly. This was it. This was the day everything ended. Not with a loud crash, not with a scene, just with absence. I didn't lose one thing. I lost everything at once. The sentence formed in my mind clearly, without emotion. It felt like a fact, not a tragedy. I thought I would feel more, but shock has its own way of protecting you. It wraps everything in stillness. I stood up again and walked around the room. Each step felt careful, like I might break something if I moved too fast. I touched the back of the chair. I straightened the suitcase handle. Small actions, small control. I needed that. I sat back down and rested my hands on my knees. They were steady. That surprised me. I expected shaking, tears, something dramatic. Instead, there was only quiet. I wasn't thinking about rebuilding yet. I didn't even know if I believed it was possible yet. All I knew was that something had ended, and endings don't always arrive with answers. Sometimes they arrive with silence. And on that morning, in that unfamiliar room, with everything I once relied on gone, I stayed very still and let the silence tell me the truth. My old life was over, and I had no idea who I would become next. Chapter 2. When survival was the only goal. The days after everything ended began to blur together. I stopped measuring time by dates or plans. I measured it by what I needed to get through the day. Food, sleep, a place to be. Nothing more. I woke up each morning in the same small room. The bed was narrow but clean. The light came in early even when I wasn't ready for it. I learned to sit up slowly, giving my body time to remember where it was. This was my shelter. It wasn't home. It didn't carry memories or comfort. It was simply a place where I could close my eyes at night without worrying about where I would wake up. That was enough. I didn't think about the future anymore. Thinking ahead felt dangerous. Every time I tried, my chest tightened and my thoughts stopped halfway through. So I didn't go there. I focused on what was in front of me. I learned where to buy the cheapest food. I chose things that lasted longer and cost less. Rice, bread, eggs. Nothing I had to think too much about. Eating wasn't pleasure anymore. It was maintenance. I ate when I needed energy, not because I wanted to enjoy a meal. Sometimes I stood by the counter and ate quietly, not bothering to sit down. Sitting felt like something from another life. Sleep came in pieces. Some nights I slept deeply from exhaustion. Other nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the buildings settle around me. My mind didn't race. That surprised me. I thought losing everything would fill my head with panic and fear. Instead, it left it empty, flat, like my thoughts had been turned down. During the day, I walked a lot, not because I had somewhere to go, but because walking gave my body something to do. It reminded me that I still existed. I passed people on the street who didn't see me, office workers, couples, parents holding hands with children. They moved with purpose, like they belonged somewhere. I moved, too, but I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I avoided places that reminded me of my old life. I avoided looking into windows that reflected versions of myself I no longer recognized. I avoided conversations whenever I could. Talking took energy I didn't have. When people did ask how I was, I answered simply, "I'm okay." They nodded. They smiled. They told me I would be fine. "You'll be fine," they said. The words were meant to help. I could hear that. I knew they wanted to reassure me. But the words felt empty. They didn't reach me. Fine felt like a future concept, something far away, something I couldn't picture yet. I wasn't fine, but I wasn't broken either. I was functioning, and functioning was all I could manage. I noticed how invisible I felt, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. People passed me without really seeing me. Conversations moved around me without stopping. Even when I was in a room with others, I felt separate, like I was behind a thin wall of glass. I didn't feel sad enough for sympathy. I didn't feel hopeful enough for encouragement. I was in between, numb. That numbness scared me more than pain would have. Pain would mean I was still connected. Numbness felt like I had stepped away from myself. But numbness also made things easier. It protected me. Without strong emotions, I could get through the day without breaking down. I could stand in line, make decisions, answer questions. I wasn't living. I was surviving. The sentence formed clearly one afternoon as I sat on a bench outside a small grocery store. I had just bought enough food for the next few days. My hands were cold and I wrapped them around the paper bag. I wasn't living. I was surviving. There was no judgment in the thought, just clarity. Surviving meant I woke up, I ate, I moved, I rested. Living felt like something else, something I couldn't reach yet. I noticed how my world had shrunk. My concerns were small now, immediate, practical. Did I have enough money for the week? Was the room paid for? What could I eat that wouldn't cost much? Big questions about purpose or meaning didn't appear. They felt irrelevant, almost rude. Survival didn't ask for meaning. It asked for attention. I started to understand why people disappear after loss, why they pull back, why their lives become quiet. It's not because they don't care. It's because caring takes energy. And all my energy was going towards staying upright. I didn't feel like explaining myself to anyone. I didn't want advice or motivation or stories about people who came back stronger. Those stories felt too loud. I needed quiet. I needed routine. I needed to know that tomorrow would look similar to today, because unpredictability felt dangerous. Sometimes, when I lay down at night, I tried to remember who I used to be, the version of me with plans, opinions, confidence. That version felt distant, not gone, just unreachable. I wondered if I would ever feel like that again. The thought came and went without urgency. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, I'll still wake up tomorrow. That was survival thinking. It wasn't hopeful, but it was honest. I realized how much of my identity had been built on things outside of me: work, relationships, stability. When those disappeared, I didn't know what was left, so I stopped asking. I told myself I would figure it out later. Later felt safer than now. People continued to tell me I would be fine. They said it with confidence, like they needed to believe it. I nodded and thanked them, but inside, the words didn't land, because fine wasn't my goal. Getting through the day was. There were moments when I felt almost nothing at all. No sadness, no anger, no relief. Just a steady, quiet awareness of existing. Those moments felt strange, but not painful. They felt neutral, and neutral felt manageable. I learned to appreciate small certainties: a warm shower, a full stomach, a locked door at night. These things mattered now. They were proof that I was still here, that I hadn't disappeared with everything else. One evening, as I sat alone in the small room, I noticed how calm it was. Not peaceful, just still. I didn't feel happy, but I didn't feel panicked either. I realized then that survival had its own rhythm: slow, repetitive, quiet. It stripped life down to what was necessary.
and right now, that was enough. I wasn't rebuilding yet. I wasn't dreaming. I was staying alive, staying present enough to move forward one small step at a time. I didn't know when living would begin again, but I understood something important. Survival wasn't weakness. It was the foundation, and for now, it was all I had. So I accepted it. I wasn't living. I was surviving. And that was okay.
Chapter 3. The Shame of Starting from Zero. The shame didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in small moments I didn't expect. Moments that should have felt practical, even reasonable, but instead made my chest tighten. The first time I asked for help, my voice felt unfamiliar in my mouth. It wasn't a dramatic request. I didn't beg. I didn't explain everything. I simply asked if someone knew of any work, any opportunity, anything temporary. The words sounded small. I hated that. I had been independent for most of my life. I paid my own bills. I made my own decisions. I solved my own problems. Now I was asking, and every part of me resisted it. I told myself it was normal, that people need help sometimes, that this didn't define me. But shame doesn't listen to logic. It speaks in comparison. It reminded me of who I used to be. I remembered walking into rooms with confidence, speaking without hesitation, introducing myself without embarrassment. I remembered being the person others asked for advice. Now, I avoided eye contact when conversations turned toward work or plans. I changed the subject quickly. I laughed things off. Anything to avoid the question, "What are you doing now?" I didn't know how to answer that honestly. I took work that I never imagined I would do again, work that required no explanation, no ambition, no future thinking. I told myself it was temporary. Still, each shift felt heavier than the last, not because the work was hard, because it reminded me of the distance between who I was and who I had become. I watched my hands move through simple tasks and felt disconnected from them. These hands once signed contracts, typed proposals, shook hands with confidence. Now they followed instructions quietly. I did the work well, I always did, but I kept my head down. I didn't want anyone to look at me too closely. I didn't want anyone to see the gap between past and present, between identity and survival. Sometimes, during breaks, I sat alone and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Not often, just enough to hurt. Photos from another life, smiling faces, places I used to belong to, moments that felt stable, even ordinary at the time. Now they felt distant, like proof that I had fallen. I compared everything. My past self had direction. My present self had excuses. My past self made plans. My present self made lists just to get through the week. The comparison was cruel, but automatic. I couldn't stop it. I started avoiding people I used to know, not because they did anything wrong, because being seen felt dangerous. I didn't want pity. I didn't want encouragement. I didn't want to explain how everything had collapsed. I especially didn't want to answer questions I didn't have answers for. So I disappeared quietly. I declined invitations. I delayed responses. I let distance grow because distance felt safer than honesty. In public, I felt smaller. Not physically, internally. I walked with my shoulders slightly forward, like I was trying to take up less space. I spoke less. I listened more. I became careful. The shame didn't shout. It whispered. It said things like, "You should be further by now. You wasted everything. You had your chance." Starting over at this age felt humiliating. Not because I believed starting over was wrong, but because I believed I shouldn't have to. I thought about how much I judged myself for needing a reset, how I treated my situation like a personal failure instead of a circumstance. Losing everything hurt. Starting again hurt more. The sentence formed one afternoon when I stood in line waiting to be paid for a day of work that barely covered expenses. Losing everything hurt. Starting again hurt more. Loss was something that happened to me. Starting again felt like something I caused. That difference mattered. I blamed myself for not preventing the fall. I blamed myself for not bouncing back faster. I blamed myself for needing time. I wondered how many people around me could see it, how many could sense that I was standing on unfamiliar ground. No one said anything, but shame doesn't need witnesses. It creates its own. At night, alone in the room, I replayed conversations in my head, things I could have said, choices I could have made differently. I questioned every decision that led me here. That questioning didn't help. It only deepened the crack. For the first time since everything ended, I felt something stronger than numbness. I felt embarrassment. Not the kind that fades quickly, the kind that settles into your posture. I noticed how I avoided mirrors more often, how I rushed through conversations, how I measured myself against an invisible standard I could no longer meet. I didn't feel angry. I felt exposed. Starting from zero stripped away the story I told about myself, the one where I was capable, established, moving forward. Without that story, I didn't know how to stand. And yet, beneath the shame, something else stirred. Awareness. I began to see how much of my pain came from comparison, not reality. The work I was doing wasn't wrong. Needing help wasn't wrong. Being here wasn't wrong. The shame came from believing I was supposed to be somewhere else, somewhere higher, somewhere safer, somewhere finished. I wasn't finished. That realization didn't comfort me, but it felt true. I started to notice how quickly I judged myself compared to how gently I judged others, how easily I offered understanding to people who struggled, but denied it to myself. That felt unfair. I wasn't weak for starting again. I was human. The shame didn't disappear overnight, but it stopped being invisible. And that was the first emotional crack, the first sign that numbness was loosening its grip, the first sign that something inside me was still alive. Chapter 4. The small choice that kept me alive. The change did not arrive as a decision. There was no moment where I stood up and promised myself a new life, no speech in my head, no surge of motivation. I didn't wake up feeling stronger or clearer. I woke up early. That was all. The alarm went off before the sky had fully lightened. For a second, I thought about turning it off and going back to sleep. There was no reason not to, no job waiting, no one expecting me anywhere. But something in me hesitated. Not because I felt inspired, because staying in bed felt heavier than getting up. So I sat up. The room was quiet, the same as always. The suitcase was still by the wall. The chairs still held yesterday's jacket. Nothing had changed overnight. But I had. Just enough. I stood up and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. The shock of it made me breathe in sharply. It reminded me that my body still responded to things, that I wasn't completely numb. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the small table, watching steam rise from the mug. The city outside was just beginning to move. A few cars passed. Someone walked a dog across the street. I noticed all of it. Usually, mornings felt like something to get through. This one felt like something to stand inside. I didn't feel hopeful. I felt present. After finishing the coffee, I opened my laptop. Not with a plan, not with confidence,
just with a quiet intention to do one thing. I searched for job listings. Not a career move, not a dream position, just one job I could apply for. Something simple, something possible. I scrolled slowly, reading without urgency. Most listings didn't fit. Some felt too big, others felt pointless. Then I found one that felt neutral. I didn't imagine myself succeeding. I didn't imagine myself failing. I just filled out the application. It took less than 20 minutes. When I clicked submit, nothing happened. No relief, no excitement, no voice saying this was the start of something new. Just silence. I closed the laptop. That was it. No one clapped, no one knew, no message arrived telling me I had done the right thing. But something inside me shifted. I had acted, not because I believed in a better future, but because I chose not to stay still. Later that day, as I walked through the neighborhood, I saw an older man struggling to carry groceries up a short flight of steps. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't looking around. I could have walked past. Most days I would have. I was tired. I had my own problems. I didn't owe anyone anything. But I stopped. "Do you want some help?" I asked. He looked surprised, then nodded. I carried one of the bags while he took the other. It took less than a minute. He thanked me and smiled. That was all. He didn't know my name. He didn't know my story. He didn't know how close I had been to disappearing inside myself. To him, I was just someone passing by. But as I walked away, I noticed something strange. My chest felt lighter. Not because I had helped someone, but because I had chosen to engage. I hadn't retreated. I hadn't avoided. I had stepped forward, even in a small way. That evening, I realized something important. All my recent days had been about endurance, holding on, getting through. This day was different. I had moved. The movement was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. I thought about how often I waited for hope to arrive before acting, how I believed motivation had to come first. But hope hadn't shown up. Action had. And action didn't ask me to feel ready. It just asked me to move. I went to bed that night feeling tired but not empty. The difference was subtle but real. The next morning, I got up early again, not because I was building a habit, because it felt better than staying in the dark. I noticed how control returned in tiny pieces, choosing when to wake up, choosing what to focus on, choosing to do one thing instead of nothing. Control didn't feel powerful. It felt grounding. There were still long hours where doubt returned, moments where I questioned whether any of this mattered, whether applying for one job or helping one person changed anything at all. But something had already changed. I wasn't frozen anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission to begin. I wasn't waiting for a feeling to save me. I was moving. One morning, as I walked with no destination, I repeated the truth quietly to myself. It wasn't hope. It was movement. Hope felt too big, too fragile, too easy to lose. Movement was simpler. Movement asked for less. It didn't promise anything. It just carried me forward. I stopped measuring my days by results. I measured them by participation. Did I show up somewhere today? Did I engage with the world instead of hiding from it? Some days the answer was no, and that was okay. This wasn't a comeback story. It was a staying alive story. I noticed how small actions kept me connected, getting dressed even when no one would see me, leaving the room even when I could stay inside, speaking to people without explaining myself. No one noticed. That was part of what made it safe. There was no pressure to perform, no expectation to succeed, no audience waiting for proof, just me choosing not to disappear. The small choices didn't erase the loss. They didn't fix the shame. They didn't restore my old life. They did something quieter. They kept me alive. alive enough to keep going, alive enough to feel something other than numbness, alive enough to believe just slightly that staying still wasn't the only option. I understood then why people talk about rock bottom as a place where everything changes, not because things suddenly get better, but because you have less to protect. I wasn't protecting an image anymore. I wasn't protecting a title or a role. I was protecting myself. And sometimes, protecting yourself looks like getting up early. Sometimes it looks like applying for one job without believing it will work. Sometimes it looks like helping a stranger without expecting anything back. None of it looked impressive. All of it mattered. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the version of me from weeks ago, the one who stayed still because moving felt pointless. I didn't judge that version. They did the best they could. But I was no longer there. I hadn't found hope. I hadn't found purpose. I had found motion. And motion was enough to carry me forward. One small choice at a time.
Chapter 5. Falling Again While Rebuilding. The fall came quietly, not as a collapse, not as a moment where everything broke again. It arrived in small disappointments that stacked on top of each other until the weight became familiar. The first rejection email came in the morning. Short, polite, final. Thank you for your interest. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. I read it once, then again. I didn't feel surprised. I had told myself not to expect anything. I closed the laptop and sat still for a moment. Then the second rejection came a few days later, then another. Each one looked the same. Different company names, same words, same ending. I stopped opening them right away. I let them sit in my inbox like unopened letters I already knew the ending to. At first, I told myself this was normal. Everyone gets rejected. It takes time. This was part of rebuilding. But doubt has a way of slipping in through repetition. One rejection is disappointing. Several begin to feel personal. I noticed my energy fading. The early mornings that once felt grounding now felt heavy. Getting out of bed took longer. Coffee didn't wake me the way it had before. Movement started to feel forced. I kept applying, but with less belief. Each application felt like a small exposure, another chance to be told I wasn't what someone wanted. I didn't talk about it to anyone. Explaining disappointment felt like too much work. I carried it quietly. At the temporary job, my body felt tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. My hands moved automatically. My mind drifted. I counted the hours until I could leave, then counted the steps back to the room. I had thought moving would make things easier. I was wrong. Movement didn't erase the pain. It brought it closer. Because now I was trying, and trying meant failing could hurt again. One evening, after a long day, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. The room looked the same as always. The suitcase, the chair, the quiet. I felt foolish. Foolish for believing that small steps would lead somewhere. Foolish for thinking I was strong enough to rebuild. Foolish for imagining that things could change just because I moved a little. The thought came slowly, without anger. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is as far as it goes. The idea didn't scare me. It tired me. I thought about how easy it would be to stop trying, to stop applying, to stop reaching outward, to stay where I was and accept the shape my life had taken. Survival was familiar. Hope was exhausting. Giving up wouldn't look dramatic. It wouldn't look like failure to anyone else. It would look like quiet acceptance. I could stop early mornings, stop searching, stop expecting anything different. I could survive. The thought felt tempting. I wasn't imagining success anymore. I was imagining rest. I realized how tired I was of holding myself together,
of staying positive enough to keep moving, of telling myself this was all part of the process. The process felt endless. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, the unfamiliar ceiling, the one that reminded me daily that I wasn't where I planned to be. I felt the old numbness creeping back, not all at once, just enough to dull the edges. That numbness felt safe. It asked for nothing. But something inside me resisted it. Not loudly, not heroically, just a quiet awareness. If I stop now, I won't feel better. I'll just feel less. That realization didn't give me strength. It gave me honesty. Starting over didn't erase the pain. The sentence came to me clearly, and I let it stay. Starting over didn't erase the pain. I had believed, without realizing it, that rebuilding would slowly replace the hurt, that movement would soften the loss, that action would heal me. But rebuilding had its own pain. Rejection reminded me of what I had lost. Effort reminded me of how far I had fallen. Hope reminded me of how uncertain everything still was. This wasn't a clean story of progress. It was messy, uneven, tiring. I thought about all the stories people like to tell about starting over, the ones where a single decision changes everything, where struggle leads neatly to success. My story didn't look like that. My story looked like effort without guarantee, like progress followed by doubt, like small steps that sometimes led nowhere. And that made me question everything. I questioned my worth. I questioned my timing. I questioned whether I had waited too long. The shame from earlier chapters returned, heavier now because I had tried. Failure hurts differently when you risk something. I sat up and took a slow breath. My chest felt tight. My thoughts felt crowded. I didn't want encouragement. I didn't want advice. I wanted rest from wanting. That night, I didn't apply for anything. I didn't make plans. I didn't try to push myself forward. I allowed myself to feel disappointed without fixing it. That was new. I realized how quickly I usually turn disappointment into action, how rarely I let myself sit with it. I had been afraid stopping would mean losing momentum, but maybe stopping was part of staying honest. I thought about how rebuilding isn't a straight line, how falling again doesn't erase the steps you've taken. The fall didn't mean I was back at the beginning. It meant I was still in the middle. The middle is the hardest place to be. There is no clear direction, no applause, no ending in sight, just effort and uncertainty. I understood then why so many people quit quietly, why they return to what's familiar, even if it hurts. Falling again while rebuilding makes you question whether rebuilding is worth it. I didn't have an answer, but I noticed something important. Even in my doubt, I hadn't disappeared completely. I hadn't numbed myself completely. I hadn't returned to total stillness. I was tired, but I was present. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. I didn't feel guilty about it. My body needed the rest. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street below. Life continued. People moved. Time passed. I didn't feel hopeful, but I didn't feel finished either. I realized rebuilding wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about choosing which pain to carry. The pain of trying or the pain of giving up. Neither felt good, but only one allowed movement. I didn't make a promise to keep going forever. I didn't tell myself this would all be worth it. I just told myself one thing. I'm allowed to fall. I'm allowed to be tired. And I don't have to decide everything today. That thought steadied me more than any motivational idea ever had. Starting over didn't erase the pain, but it taught me something honest. Pain doesn't mean you're failing. Sometimes it means you're still here, still trying, still alive in the middle of the story. And for now, That was enough to keep me from giving up quietly, enough to stay one more day, enough to stand back up, not with confidence, but with truth. And truth felt more solid than hope ever had.
Chapter 6. Understanding what nothing gave me. The understanding didn't arrive as comfort. It arrived as clarity. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the small room, I realized how little there was left to lose. The thought wasn't dramatic. It didn't scare me. It settled quietly, like something that had been true for a while but hadn't been named. I had no reputation to protect anymore, no title that followed me into rooms, no role people expected me to play, no version of myself that needed to be maintained. That used to terrify me. Now it felt strangely light. I thought about how much energy I once spent managing how I was seen, making sure I sounded confident, making sure my life looked stable, making sure I appeared successful even on days I didn't feel it. That effort was gone now, not because I had chosen to let it go, because it had been taken from me. And in its absence, something unexpected appeared: freedom. I didn't have expectations to meet anymore. No one assumed I had answers. No one asked me about long-term plans or next steps with confidence behind their questions. People didn't look to me for certainty, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to provide it. I noticed how honest my days had become. When I was tired, I rested without explaining myself. When I didn't know something, I said so. When I felt unsure, I didn't hide it behind confidence. There was nothing left to pretend. That realization felt uncomfortable at first. Pretending had been my armor. It helped me survive social spaces. It helped me feel acceptable. It helped me belong. But it also kept me distant from myself. Without it, I felt exposed and real. I began to see how loss had stripped my life down to what was essential, not in a poetic way, in a practical one. I still needed food, sleep, shelter, but I didn't need approval the way I once thought I did. I didn't need to impress anyone. I didn't need to prove that I was okay. I thought about all the decisions I used to make based on how they would look, whether they would make sense to others, whether they fit the image of who I was supposed to be. Now there was no image, just me. That didn't make choices easier, it made them clearer. I stopped asking, what will people think? I started asking, what can I actually handle today? That question felt smaller and more honest. I realized how much responsibility I carried without blame. I wasn't angry at my past self for the choices that led here. I wasn't ashamed of where I was. I simply accepted it. This was the ground I was standing on, and from this ground I could choose. Not big choices, small ones. Choices that didn't require pretending to be someone else. When I had nothing left, I stopped pretending. The sentence came to me one morning as I stood by the window, watching the street below. It felt true in a way that didn't need explanation. I stopped pretending I knew where I was going. I stopped pretending I was confident. I stopped pretending I had control. And in stopping, I felt more grounded than I had in years. There was no one to impress anymore. That didn't make me invisible. It made me honest. I noticed how this honesty changed my posture. I stood differently, spoke more slowly, listened more carefully. I wasn't performing stability. I was practicing presence. That shift was subtle, but it mattered. Loss had taken many things from me: comfort, security, identity. But it also removed expectations that were never mine to carry. I believed that success meant certainty, that adulthood meant having answers, that strength meant holding everything together without letting cracks show. Now, without anything left to protect, I could see how heavy those beliefs were. I didn't need them anymore.
I understood that responsibility didn't mean control, it meant awareness. I was responsible for my choices now, for how I treated myself, for how honestly I lived. But I wasn't responsible for explaining my life to anyone. That distinction gave me peace. I thought about how often people confuse having nothing with being nothing. They are not the same. Having nothing removed distractions. It forced me to confront who I was without accomplishments to lean on. That wasn't comfortable, but it was real. I began to trust myself in a new way, not because I felt capable of anything, but because I knew I would respond honestly to what came. I would rest when I needed to. I would move when I could. I would stop when stopping was necessary. That trust didn't come from confidence. It came from acceptance. I accepted that my life didn't look impressive. I accepted that my future was unclear. I accepted that rebuilding would take time, and that time would include uncertainty. Acceptance didn't feel like giving up. It felt like standing on solid ground for the first time in a long while. I realized that losing everything had taken away my excuses. I could no longer blame pressure, expectations, or appearances for choices that didn't feel right. If I did something now, it was because I chose to. If I didn't, it was because I couldn't. Both were valid. That clarity was empowering in a quiet way, not loud, not motivating, just steady. I noticed how calm my thoughts had become, not because things were easier, because I wasn't fighting reality anymore. I wasn't trying to prove I was okay. I was being where I was, and that honesty gave me more strength than pretending ever had. I thought about the version of myself from before the loss, the one that seemed put together, the one that had answers ready. That version wasn't stronger. They were just better protected. Now, without protection, I was more exposed, but I was also more free. I didn't need to be impressive. I needed to be real. The loss hadn't given me wisdom overnight. It had given me permission. Permission to stop performing. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to live without an audience. When I had nothing left, I stopped pretending. And in that stopping, I found something unexpected. Not hope, not certainty, but truth. And truth, quietly held, felt like the strongest thing I had left. Strong enough to keep going, strong enough to build again, not from illusion, but from honesty, one small, real choice at a time.
Chapter 7. Building a Life No One Applauds. The life I began to build did not look impressive. There were no announcements, no turning points that deserved a story, no moment where someone looked at me and said they were proud. Most people wouldn't have noticed anything had changed at all, but inside, something was slowly settling. My days became simple. I woke up at the same time most mornings, not early in a disciplined way, not late in a defeated way, just at a time that felt reasonable for the body I was in. I made coffee, I ate something small, I checked what needed to be done that day. Nothing dramatic, just enough structure to hold the day together. I worked when I could. The work wasn't meaningful in the way I once defined meaning. It didn't build a career or move me closer to a dream, but it paid something. It gave shape to my hours, and I showed up for it. That mattered more than I expected. I started to trust routines again, not because they promised a future, because they gave me ground under my feet. I noticed how my body responded to regular meals, to sleeping at consistent times, to leaving the room even when I didn't feel like it. Stability returned quietly, without celebration. No one congratulated me for doing basic things, and that was okay. This life wasn't being built for an audience. It was being built for me. I learned how to measure progress differently, not by achievements,
by how steady I felt moving through the day. Some mornings I felt tired, some afternoons felt long, some evenings passed without anything worth remembering. But I wasn't anxious, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't pretending, I was present. I noticed a change in how I spoke to myself. The voice that once criticized every small decision grew quieter. I stopped asking whether what I was doing was enough by someone else's standard. I asked a simpler question: can I live like this today? Most days the answer was yes, and that was enough. There were no big successes to point to, no milestones that made sense in a story, no visible proof that I was back. But there was dignity in the way I lived now. I paid my own way again, even if it wasn't much. I kept my space clean. I took responsibility for my time. These things felt small, but they carried weight. They told me I could trust myself again. I thought about how much pressure I once felt to be exceptional, to be moving forward in ways that were easy to explain, to build a life that looked good from the outside. Now I didn't need that. I needed honesty. I noticed how quiet my life had become. Fewer conversations, fewer explanations, fewer comparisons. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was steady. I spent evenings doing ordinary things, reading, walking, sitting with a cup of tea and no plans. I didn't feel bored. I felt grounded. There were still moments when doubt tried to return, when I saw someone from my past doing well, when I heard stories of success that reminded me of who I used to be. The comparison appeared briefly, then faded, because I no longer measured myself against outcomes. I measured myself against peace, and peace was something I had now. Not perfect, but real. I learned how to trust small routines the way I once trusted big plans. I trusted that waking up and showing up mattered, that consistency, even without recognition, built something solid. This life wasn't loud, but it held. I felt dignity returning in unexpected ways, in how I spoke to others without defensiveness, in how I listened without rushing, in how I moved through spaces without feeling smaller. I wasn't impressive, but I was intact. That mattered. I stopped waiting for validation, stopped hoping someone would notice how far I'd come, stopped needing my story to make sense to anyone else. The strength I felt now didn't come from achievement. It came from self-trust, from knowing I could build a life slowly without applause. I thought about how many people live this way quietly, doing what needs to be done, carrying responsibilities without recognition, holding themselves together without praise. I felt connected to them in a way I hadn't before. This wasn't a temporary phase. It was a foundation. I realized how often I once believed that small lives were sad lives, that simplicity meant settling, that quiet meant absence. I was wrong. Simplicity made room, quiet made space, and space allowed me to breathe. One evening, as I walked home after a long day, I noticed how steady my steps felt. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. The street lights came on one by one. People passed me, each carrying their own invisible stories. I didn't feel behind them. I didn't feel ahead. I felt alongside. I thought about the line that had formed in my mind weeks ago, and now felt settled. My life was small, but it was mine. The sentence didn't make me sad. It made me proud in a quiet way. I wasn't chasing something anymore. I was building something. Not a version of my old life, a new one, built slowly, honestly, without an audience. There were still things I wanted, still uncertainties, still moments of fatigue, but I wasn't lost. I was rooted, and that rootedness gave me a strength I had never known before. Not the strength to impress, the strength to stay, to keep going even when no one was watching, to trust the life I was building even when it didn't look like success. This chapter of my life wouldn't make headlines, it wouldn't inspire speeches, but it held me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The life I was building didn't ask for applause, it asked for presence, and I was finally giving it that.
Chapter 8. I rebuilt my life after losing everything. I didn't look back with anger. That surprised me. For a long time, I thought if I ever reached this point, this quiet place where life felt stable again, I would feel resentment toward what I lost, toward the people who left, toward the version of myself who didn't see it coming. But standing here now, that bitterness never arrived. What I felt instead was clarity. My life was not impressive. It wasn't dramatic or inspiring in the way stories like to be. There were still limits, still days that felt heavy, still things I wanted but didn't have. But I was present inside my life, and that changed everything. I could see my past without flinching now, not just the collapse, but the years before it, the way I lived, the choices I made, the parts of myself I abandoned long before everything fell apart. I understood something important. Losing everything didn't create my emptiness. It revealed it. When the job disappeared, when the relationship ended, when the future I thought I had vanished, what remained was me. Stripped of roles, stripped of labels, stripped of the identity I had been hiding inside. At the time, that felt unbearable. Now, it felt honest. I no longer defined myself by what I lost. The loss had stopped being the center of my story. It was a chapter, not a conclusion. I thought about how survival slowly turned into rebuilding, how numb days turned into steady routines, how small choices added weight to my life again. None of it happened quickly, and none of it needed to. Rebuilding wasn't about becoming who I was before. It was about becoming someone who could stay present, stay honest, stay connected to myself, even when life felt uncertain. There were still mornings when I woke up unsure, still nights when doubt returned quietly, still moments when I wondered how different things might have been. But those thoughts didn't pull me apart anymore. They passed through. I had learned how to hold them without collapsing. That felt like wisdom, even if I didn't call it that at the time. I noticed how differently I moved through the world now. I didn't rush to explain myself. I didn't need my life to make sense to others. I didn't measure my worth by progress I could show. I measured it by presence. Was I here? Was I listening? Was I taking care of myself in small, honest ways? Most days, the answer was yes. That was enough. I realized how much strength I had gained from starting over without an image to protect, without expectations to meet, without a version of success to perform. Loss had taken many things from me, but it also removed the pressure to pretend. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already survived the worst moment I thought I couldn't. Everything after that was practice. Practice in patience. Practice in humility. Practice in trusting a life that didn't promise much, but offered stability. I didn't rebuild my life to impress anyone. I rebuilt it to be livable, to be sustainable, to be mine. Looking back, I felt gratitude in places I never expected, not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced, not for the loss, but for the honesty it required. I wouldn't choose to lose everything again, but I wouldn't erase what it taught me either. It taught me that identity is fragile when it's built on things that can disappear, It taught me that presence is stronger than plans. It taught me that rebuilding isn't about speed, it's about direction. And my direction now was inward, grounded, steady. I thought about the version of myself at the beginning of this story, waking up in a place that didn't feel like home, counting what was gone, wondering how to exist without the life I thought defined me. That person felt distant now, not because I rejected them, but because I carried them forward. I had rebuilt my life without erasing that version of me, without pretending it never happened, without rushing past it. That felt important. My life today still had limits, still had uncertainty, still had quiet days that passed without anything remarkable, but it also had something I didn't have before: ownership. I lived inside my choices now. I felt the ground under my feet. I trusted myself to keep going even when nothing exciting was happening. Loss no longer defined who I was. It had shaped me, yes, but it did not own me. I was more than what ended, more than what fell apart, more than what disappeared. I stood in my life now with both feet planted, not reaching backward, not rushing forward, just standing, present. As the day ended and the light shifted, I noticed how calm my body felt, how steady my breath was, how quiet my thoughts had become. There was no celebration, no final moment of triumph, just a deep, simple understanding. I had rebuilt my life. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. I lost everything, but I didn't lose myself. And that truth stayed with me, quiet and strong, long after the story ended.